welcome to Spotlight Podcast. Today we have a very interesting guest today. This is a very special one too. Thomas Moonengle. He is a shamanic practitioner, artist, author, and a teacher. He teaches Tai Chi and has two channels about Tai Chi and spiritual healing. He wrote two books and made a meditation album. I actually want to jump right into this one.
Okay.
Really, I really do, because you seem like a very interesting person. So, where you from?
Well, originally I was born in Florida and South Florida, and I lived there until I was about 9. And then whole family moved up to Kentucky when I was a kid, and I've been here ever since.
How was it like growing up in Kentucky?
It was very different from South Florida. When we moved here, I did not have clothes for winter, so
How was that?
that is I'm still it's I don't want to say how many years I've been here, but I'm still not adjusted to winter. So
Wow. Can you tell us about your journey and how you has it influencing your background in your life?
sure. Growing up, um, I was raised in a religious family, um, but I've always had sort of an interest in, I guess, alternative stuff. And I guess for me, I was always keyed into other people's emotions and how they were feeling. Um, some people call themselves empaths, and I really think it can be an overused word, but basically, I would notice when people were upset. Just visually, I could tell. Or some people don't pay any attention to cues about how other people are feeling. I did. I always was, and then that can expand to like spaces and you know just getting hints and intuition about stuff. But when I hit my teenage years, I got very interested in divination, things like tarot, and I started working with that and started looking into meditation. And after that, in my 20s, I got interested into healing work after an illness. Um, and from there, it just sort of took off.
All right. What inspired you to combine Tai Chi in your spiritual practice?
Well, the Tai Chi, I actually, when I was in school, when I went to college, and at the time, the university still required you to have like a PE credit. Like you had to have two different PE credits. And it was an elective, and I took it, and the teacher that was there, I just kept on, I liked it, and I kept studying with him for about 7 years, privately after that. And then I've been practicing. I just told my students today, it's like this is my 28th year of practicing Tai Chi. Um, so I've done that a long time, and I like it. And got into Qigong a few years ago. Found a local teacher that I liked, and have been really into that. And that's influenced, my not just my Tai Chi teaching, but also the healing work that I do as well.
All right. So, what has been the most transformative moment in your career?
Oh wow. There's a couple. I mean, one was definitely I when I was in my mid 20s, I got very sick. Um, and I was misdiagnosed, which then was treated for stuff that I didn't have, which made me very sick. But coming out of that, it was a huge shift when I started to get better. Uh, just in my perspective, It made me much more grateful because you don't when you're young you don't really appreciate your health until you don't have it.
Yeah.
But it also made me look at, ways to, be more in control of my health and my own healing. Um, but it really opened my senses. If you've ever had like a near death or very, been very sickly ill, you don't have the energy to deal with fabrication, lies, or, anything like that. So you become much more keyed into false things. And so it's like someone says something false, you're just like, nope, I'm not going to deal with that because you don't
Yeah.
have the energy for it.
So what is yeah. So what inspired you to do this? Like who is not matter of fact, let me rephrase that
Okay.
question. Who was the inspiring person that started you to doing this?
Um, I've had a couple people. One was like my Tai Chi instructor. He was very good, very human, very flawed. Um, which is you always want to, have teachers that are very open about their flaws. Um, Another was like encountering somebody who practiced Reiki and just demonstrated on me because people won't believe this now, but when I first heard about Reiki, I said that sounds kind of. Can I swear on this podcast?
Okay, you good.
Okay, good. All right, I said that sounds like bullshit. Just the way it was described to me. And so they took my hand and they put theirs on top of it, and it was like sticking your hand into like a hot tub, but dry. And I was like, oh my God, that's real. Um, and so that was eye opening. Um, but then, I was very lucky to meet not one, but two shamanic teachers within months of each other that happened to live in my area. Um, and, start learning with them. And I still see them. I still talk with them. I still ask them questions and advice. And so it was that was really inspiring. And they both know each other. They both respect each other, which is also helpful. So they're not saying don't do what they say. No, they're very respectful of one another. And yeah, just to see people who are doing this work, and a lot of times um, people do this work, they don't talk about it too much because it freaks a lot of people out because they don't understand it. Um, so anything people don't understand, they can easily become afraid of. And so anytime I get a chance to sort of educate people on it and like take some of the fear out of it, I really like to do that.
What makes people scared of it?
Um, Probably seeing too many horror movies. So, to give you an example, I was recently called in to uh, do a house clearing for somebody. They had bought this house and they were, renting it out as, sort of like an Airbnb, and they were having trouble keeping tenants because the place is haunted. I mean, it just is. Um, but the previous owners had lived there for 30 plus years and got along just fine. So I asked them what the trouble was, and they say, well, the lights flicker and we hear footsteps. And I was like, I'm like, okay. I'm sitting there listening to waiting for what the trouble was, because I was like, well, that's nothing. But their reaction was like they were living in the Amityville horror, and I'm like, seriously, this is not bad. I've been to places where it is really bad and where people are hurt, but Most of the time, it's just, I think it's people's reaction to the supernatural, um, because it's so new and it's so unexpected for them, and they don't understand it, and so it frightens them, and because it's unknown, and then the only knowledge base they have to fall back on is movies and television, and those are, they go for the jump scares, and that's not really how most things play out in the real world.
Got you. Can you share a story about the impactful healing sessions you conducted?
I have to be real careful about not divulging, people's personal information. But I have had a couple people who have had, just constant pain. Um, and then in the session, it it vanishes and goes away, um, and they're just astonished. Um, I will say when that happens, it's usually when I am in the least amount of control of the session, meaning something moves through me. I don't do it, is what I'm saying. Something else comes and helps and does that work. And I just kind of get out of the way. And I actually prefer that because anytime that happens, I work much less hard when something else comes in and comes through to do the work for me. I prefer that. If that could happen every time, I'd be like,
Yeah,
yes. I just stand back and hold space. That would be great. Sometimes I have to do a little bit more work than that, though. But I've had people who've had migraines, um, that have gone on for weeks and had that, you know, dissipate within a session. Um, and then I've also had people who've had spiritual problems. I think the most profound differences I've seen is with depossession work. And to explain what that is when we go through life, we're surrounded by all sorts of energies, and sometimes those energies will attach to us. And sometimes those energies
yeah,
are intelligent, and sometimes they're not. When they're not, that's not a big issue. We just pick them off, and clean off, and go out. But when they are, we have to have them like removed. And that's called a depossession. And which is different than an exorcism. I want to point that out. So a depossession can be a spirit of someone who's passed over, who's just attached to somebody. And these are not always, again, malevolent things. So I've had someone who had an ancestor attached to them, and meant no harm to them, but it was not good for the person because you know they need to move on. Um, and sometimes it'll be spirit of roadkill or something that's just, it sees your light, comes to you, and just latches onto you. But that's like carrying an extra, weight on your shoulders through life, and you don't want that. Um, so those, when those are released, sometimes you can just see almost immediate changes with people, and it's like night and day. Um, and it's very healing work. And
hmm,
early on when I was learning it, I mean, because of raised in religious background, you come in with that sort of battle mentality of like, I'm gonna get this out of you, and it was used to be very exhausting. But now I'm more, it's like it's healing not just for the person who I'm working on, but whatever is attached to them. It's healing work for them as well to help them find peace. And approaching it that way with compassion, much less taxing for me. So if I can prevent something to becoming a battle, that's what I'm going to do.
yeah. Um, how do you approach creating your meditation albums? Like chords of lights of, what creative process is your
Well,
process?
for Chords of Light, there what the reason that became an album was I would see a lot of people, and there's something called chord work in shamanism, and meaning when we have a relationship with anything, whether it's another person, a place, a substance, we've got an energy cord to it. And I kept seeing a lot of people, or sometimes even the same people, and I'd have to do cord work on them. I'd either have to clean their cords or cut cords for them between certain things. And because I was just doing the same thing over and over again, I was like, I would tell people, you can do this yourself once you've learned the process, um, and keep this a lot clearer. And so that's how the idea came to create that album, was just sort of like a way for people to manage their own energy and the relationships and how those that energy flows between them. So from there, it was just a matter of um, taking my process and creating a script, and then working with HemiSync, because at the time I had some contacts in that company, and sending them sort of a sample idea. And then when they approved it, I just had to revise the script and then meet with them and go out and record my part of it. And then they provided the wonderful music um, for it themselves. So I love that partnership to be able to do that, because my audio editing skills are nowhere near that quality.
Can you walk us through the inspiration behind your books, drumming down?
Sure. My first book was Drumming Down the Runes, and it's working with the Norse Futhark runes that people use for divination. Um, but one of my shamanic teachers had said something that uh, sometime one of her teachers had said, we should journey to the runes. And I thought that was a great idea to like do shamanic journeys to the runes. And then I thought that would make actually a really good book. And I let it sit on the back burner for a couple years before I started to look into that. And then uh, not long after I got my office, I now had like a dedicated space, and that's when I started working on doing all the journey work for that. So that took about 2 years. 1 year to do all the journeys, and then another year to write up, edit, revise, and produce the book. The second book, which just came out, which is Tales of Mistfall, that came out because during the pandemic lockdown, basically all my classes were canceled. So I had all this time, um, and I got back into a lot of creative work. I also, I do ceramic art and other sort of sculpture, but I've also enjoyed creative writing in the past, and I had a couple of ideas, and I just originally was going to do a writing group with some friends, but I'm the only one that kept writing. So I just I just started writing short stories, and they all sort of happened in my same little world that I created. And as time went on, it became more rich. I tried to pull in from my healing and shamanic paths, actual truths into some of the stories, so that even though it happens in the fictional world, it's fantasy, and it's, you know, magic isn't that flashy in our world. It has some of its inspiration in
Yeah,
actual, I guess, principles, if that makes sense. But it just
yeah,
developed, and I'm part of that is that when I go out and I walk my dog every day. Um, I look at the natural and I will get messages and well, sometimes those messages were inspirations for stories. Sometimes when I've had older family members that were getting ready to pass, I would often be told that beforehand that their time was coming. Um, so I could prepare. Um, but a lot of times it's some simpler messages than that, or just like the little echoes of an idea. And so for people that are looking for inspiration, if I'm like, get outside, walk, because that's where most of my ideas come from, or most of my inspirations or messages from spirit will come when I'm outdoors. Um, so yeah, I wish I had people like, how did you do this? And I was like, part of it is being open to it. Part of it is sitting down, dedicating time to doing it. And that was one thing I had a lot of during the pandemic was time. And I do want to write another book of stories. I've already started, but I'm like, this is gonna be a lot harder. It might take a lot longer because I'm not gonna be stuck in place like I was before. It's like I'll do this, or you're just gonna be sitting here. Um, but yeah, I think creativity, um, I think is sacred, and I think is very spiritual. So it for some people it might seem unrelated to the other work that I do, but I find that creative work is very healing for me, because I have a very active mind, and if I don't give it something productive to do, it will seek out my own destruction. It will imagine all the terrible things that can go wrong. So it's better if I'm imagining plots for stories, I think, or creating my next, piece of artwork. So like it's kind of like idle hands, but in this case it's idle minds. If I'm not having something to focus on, um, I'll get pulled along with whatever's being out there. And a lot of what's in media and in the world is stuff to like make you afraid of something or make you hate someone or make you not like yourself.
Yeah,
So by focusing on creativity, that sort of short circuits that and puts you back in touch with your own self and your own heart.
got you, got you. What motivates you to start teaching and sharing knowledge through your workshop and YouTube channels?
Um, Well, the YouTube channel I started about the time that I decided like I wanted to do this as a business. So I was like, I need to be out on the internet. So I was like, a lot of my videos are basically samples. They're like free samples for people for some of the energy work that I do. Or the Tai Chi channel happened during the pandemic because I couldn't be in front of my students. Um, so I had to learn how to teach to a camera, which is a whole process. Um, as far as teaching workshops and all that, people would ask me um, to do things or teach this or do that. And because originally I did not feel qualified to teach at all. I thought like that's someone older has to do that, right? Um,
Yeah,
but it turns out, experience and age are not the same thing. So you can be very experienced and be young, or very inexperienced and be old. Um, and you can be a wise young person or a foolish old person. And I'm probably equally wise and foolish. But as far as teaching is just, I found that I was good at it, which I was not expecting. And so it's just like darn, couldn't I have been good at something that makes more money? Because teaching does not make great money in our society. Um, but I actually I do enjoy it, and I love talking with my students, no matter whether it's my Tai Chi or when I'm teaching classes on shamanism or healing or anything like that. I really enjoy that role and sharing.
Mhm. How do you tailor your teaching in different audience from beginning? I mean, sorry, from beginners to more advanced practitioners.
That's tricky. I mean that takes practice, particularly, and I have that going on now always with my Tai Chi classes because I teach at community centers. So there's always new people coming in and there's always returning students. And if you only cater to the beginners, the people who've been coming will get bored. But if you only cater to the people who've been coming, the new students will give up. So every time you're in front of a class, you have to sort of calculate, and you do this sort of uh, if you've ever seen the meme of the older woman with all the little like math equations overlaid over her face as she's with some little saying underneath, that's kind of how I picture it in my mind. That I'm always doing this weird calculation of like, okay, what can we teach today? What is everybody able to do here? When it's more of a workshop, you come in assuming that you're going to have to start from the very basic and build the skill. Um, so that's a little bit easier because it's just built into there is a lesson plan. When I teach my weekly classes, I used to make lesson plans and I always end up throwing them out because some other person would be in the class or the class makeup would shift and that lesson plan would no longer work. Like I might know like that person can't do this movement because of their blood pressure, that person can't do this because their hip, or they'll dizzy, or they've got vertigo, they can't, so I'm always sitting there going, okay, what can we do? And then I also am looking at things like the weather and the season. So right now we've had just like this really brutal cold snap, so everything I'm doing, I'm looking like, okay, what can we do to bring more heat into the body, and increase our circulation, and help us stay warm, help us stay healthy. So it's very active mentally, but observing it, people think nothing's going on there. But there's a lot. You have to really, really know your subject, and you have to really know your students, um, to kind of answer that question. I mean, that was the other thing about like, how did you write a book? And I was like, well, when I wasn't teaching like all these classes, I had all this extra mental energy because when I started back to teaching again, I realized my writing slowed down. And it was because all that creative energy was going into teaching. So
Got you, got you, got you. Can you tell me what advice would you have for someone looking to explore holistic self improvement?
I would say, look around your community, see who's teaching, see what people are saying. There is a lot in my field, that is, I would say, cosmetic healing, where they're not going into the depths, but it's more feel good stuff.
Yeah,
And that's not a bad place to start. But if you're wanting like deep, lasting change, a lot of times you're going to have to go deeper and into uncomfortable spaces, in yourself. So, like most of the shamanic circles I've sat in, some of those classes, they'll bring up uncomfortable things, like things you're afraid of, things that you're uncertain about. And I feel like if you're not encountering any of that, that means you're not really moving deeper. That said, you have to know your own boundaries and be comfortable saying no. I always say be comfortable with being able to fire a teacher if they violate, your boundaries. your safety, and if they're not in integrity. I fired teachers before for not for doing shady things. Um, so you have to you teachers have to be held accountable for their actions and how they treat people. So
Got you. Is that the core value, guys, that you practice in teaching as well?
yes, I'm very open that I am not perfect. And if I feel like I have an ulterior motive with a student, I will refer them to somebody else, because it means that I have a bias there that I can't get past. And, you know, it's about the student. It's not about me, being the teacher. It's like their well being is the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. So, you know, don't date your students is my main thing. Don't ever date your students. If you want to date your students, refer them to another teacher and then meet them socially as an equal. That that's an easy one. But yeah, there are times where you've got to see that, and also in my field there are communities and organizations that can be very cult like. So you have to be aware of that as well. And I would say any group that says that you can only access your spirit or your sacred power or improvement or healing through them, I'd be very wary of that. Um, if they say we can help you, find that that's different. But if they're saying they're the only ones, or if you start to, and if you're in that sort of like position where you feel like you need these other people in order to access that, that's something to look at because you can be taken advantage of very easily if you have that belief. So you really need to have a strong sense of yourself and your worth.
Got you. How do you balance your personal spiritual journey with your professional responsibilities?
Well, in order to do this work, I have to do certain things for myself. I have to do my own, you know, I can't teach Tai Chi if I don't do my own workout. So that's one. I need to meditate regularly. I need to do self-care. I need to, switch off sometimes. Like I'm not walking around all the time switched on and reading everybody's energy wherever I go.
Yeah,
That would be exhausting. I know some people do that. I don't advise that, and I find that off-putting when someone tries to do that to me if they haven't asked permission. It's boundary thing.
yeah,
So I think that's another misconception. If you have abilities, I can track energies, I can see things in people and all, but usually only if I'm working on them. Because there's that agreement. You've agreed to be here, you've agreed to let me see you, you've agreed to let me into your energy, and when that's done, you close off and you go about your business. Now, I still get intuitions about stuff when I'm out and about and all, but I don't generally just go up to somebody and say, "Hey, you know, I've got a message for you." Um, I'm too shy for that. They'll have to find someone a bit more bossy than me. If spirit wants that sort of stuff, they'll have to find someone else to do it. Because I won't.
got you, got you, got you. I hope I say this word right. Um, what trends do you see in the fields of shamanism, tai
Shamanism,
chi, yes, tai
yeah.
chi and spiritual healing?
Um, well, I mean, Tai Chi is not as popular right now. What's really popular right now is yoga. Um, but Qigong is starting, which is related to Tai Chi in some ways, is starting to become more popular as well. Shamanism is starting to become more well known. Um, and which is interesting. Even where I live, I tell people I've got people and clients on the coast, and when I tell them like, yeah, there's a big shamanic community here in Kentucky, and they're like, really? I'm like, well, yeah, it's just real quiet. You won't know unless you're part of it. Um, but there's a lot of interest in, I guess, lineages now. So shamanism is sort of a blanket term for a lot of indigenous healing practices. Um, a lot of what people have learned in Western society is out of the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, which came out of, I believe, Michael Harner's work. He wrote Way of the Shaman, who's an anthropologist. And then, some of his students, like Sandra Ingerman, have wrote, she's written so many books. I'm trying to think of Soul Retrieval. She literally wrote the book on that. And a lot of them have influenced a lot of people. One of my teachers was one of her students. So, and then my other teacher is influenced mostly by the South American shamanism. So things coming out of the Andes of and in Peru. And so sometimes we'll have an indigenous healer come up and do ceremony here a couple times a year, and that's becoming more popular. I guess what you call destination healing, where people go and they take these trips. Um, I would say if you're going to do that, um, maybe see if you know someone locally first who has been there and has experienced, because there are a lot of people who will put on a hat and say, I'm a shaman, and, do things that are not safe. Um, so you always want to research and make sure that this is, not somebody just taking advantage and giving you a bunch of psychedelics and, leaving you to lay on the beach. Um, so, that I would say, like, destination healing and shamanism is is very popular right now. But again, a lot of people are doing it from like a cosmetic sense. They're like feel good shamanism, and a lot of times when you get into shamanic practice, it can be very uncomfortable. Um, so you want to make sure you're in a safe space for that, and that you trust the people around you. Um, and as far as other holistic, I mean, there's so many trends. It's hard to keep track of. Um, and I would say, keep an open mind, but also don't, just because somebody says something, don't necessarily believe that it's all what they say. You've got to experience and like have some a little bit of skepticism. Like, don't completely count things out, but be like, okay, I'll try it and see. But particularly if somebody is, touting the world and, you know, saying this treatment and, only $4,000 and you'll be a whole new, I'd be a little bit skeptical about that. So you want to vet people that let into your energy. I think.
Yeah. If you could have dinner with three spiritual and historical figures, who would they be and why?
Oh my gosh, I hadn't thought about that. Hmm. There are a couple gurus out of the East, some of the yogis like Muktananda that might be, or Sai Baba, that might be just interesting to see what they get up to during dinner. Um, I would say, I mean, Jesus Christ is an easy one just to see, like, you know, what's he actually like? Because people have said a lot about him.
Yeah.
But I mean, gosh, I think maybe one of the great Renaissance artists too. I can't quite, either Michelangelo or Leonardo, just to just to observe their process and how they conceptualize things. Um, but yeah, I think that that would be it. Maybe, oh gosh, if I was to pick an author, maybe Tolkien. I've always loved Lord of the Rings. Um, so yeah, no
What
deep
fun?
meaning. Just it'd just be interesting to see what happens at dinner.
Yeah. What fun fact about yourself that most people don't know about you?
A fun fact about me. Hmm, my goodness, trying to think. What don't people? I'm incredibly goofy. If you know me in my personal life, which doesn't always come across if you see me professionally. But if I can be silly, I absolutely will. And I would love to do that more in my healing practice, but people are coming in and they're feeling a little trepidations as it is. So I try to be nice and calm and not too much of a goofball when I'm with them. At least at first. After working with me for a bit, we can bring that in because I feel like joy is healing as well. But yeah.
Got you. What are your future goals and aspiration in your practice and teaching?
Um, I would like to do more workshops, traveling, and do more ceremonies with people publicly. As far as my practice shrank during the pandemic, as most people's did, and I would like to kind of rebuild that and regrow it. And then, I'd like to write more books. In my heart of hearts, I'd love to have my books turned into films or television shows because I think it would be fun to see these worlds on the screen. So just a few little goals out there.
How do you see your role involving in the next 5 years?
In the next 5 years, well, I've had a lot of people reach out to me recently that have been struggling with current events. And so I feel like my role is to be support for people who are struggling and are trying to reorientate themselves, find hope, find purpose. And then that helps me when I struggle. Because sometimes if you can't show up for yourself, you're able to show up for other people. I don't know why that is, but I think it's because as human beings, we're very community oriented. And so we don't do well on our own. But if we can be there for someone, it makes us feel more whole.
Right about that one. What advice would you give to someone aspiring to follow in your footsteps?
Don't follow in my footsteps, follow in your own. But I would say, tend your heart. Um, if you're doing this, do it because you want to help people. Um, find good teachers and find community. Um, it, I'll tell you, this is not the way to get rich quick. If you want to do this work, it's a calling to do, and you don't have to go into this. Well, anybody can embrace spirit and can embrace healing in their own life. They don't have to necessarily make a career out of it. Um, but if you want to, if you really feel drawn to like this is what you need to do, it's really important to find good teachers. And it's really good to have strong ethical boundaries because you will be tempted along the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anything inspiring you want to say to the fans out there?
Yeah. Um, there is always something somewhere that wants to help you. Um, at least that's been my experience, you know, and particularly when things seem very dark and hopeless, um, that's when you need to start looking for um, the light of spirit to help guide you out of it.
Yeah, got you. Uh, how can we find you?
Oh well, I'm on YouTube, Thomas Mooneygle, and I've got my own website, thomasmooneygle.com. So if you just put my name in Google, you'll find me.
All right, y'all hear it, everybody. If you're looking for it, you want to learn something, or you just trying to, have a spiritual coach, go find him. Find him on YouTube, or you can Google his name right there. Other than that, I thank you for having me,
Yeah,
thank you for having coming to this interview and let me do this interview
yeah,
with you and
yeah.
and giving me the time to because it's been a little rough couple of weeks, rescheduling
It,
here and there.
yeah. Well, that is that's January. You can never tell what's gonna happen.
Yeah. Well, I thank you again, and I God bless you, and
Thank
thank you
you.
for doing the show with me.
All right,
All right.
all right. Let's see.
Thank you,
Okay.
thank you, thank you.
All right.